Okay, so this lecture is going to finish out Chapter 4 and combine 5, because 4 and 5 have similar information, and it will have some of the vocabulary about the presentation of the self in everyday life. Those of you who have already accessed the second 25-point activity that is available, I don't remember the due date off the top of my head, but it's posted in Blackboard. So those of you who have already accessed it, you only have so much of the information so far in the lectures to be able to complete it successfully. So today we'll finish out Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 combined, and then on Wednesday we'll start Chapter 6 and probably spend all of next week on Chapter 6 also. So this is week 6 of the semester, and then week 7 we should be able to finish up with all of this with Chapters 4 through 6. And that's when you'll get, so you were asking, like, when will the midterm test be? The midterm test, I will probably give it to you, make it available to all of you through Blackboard on probably Wednesday of next week. And then it'll be due, like, the following Wednesday. Did you say something, smarty pants? You did? You want to say it louder? Do what? Yes, so for my face-to-face classes, it is going to be on paper, so you're going to watch. Do what?
On paper, we take it home.
Oh, you want me to print it for you instead of you print it on, does that matters? Okay.
I don't know, I like taking tests on paper. I don't know.
Well, I mean, when I say I'm going to provide it for you on Blackboard, it's going to be like a paper thing, like you can print out the 25-point activity, and it's on paper. So the one that I'm going to post on Blackboard is going to be a paper thing, and you can print it, but handwrite the answers if you want to, or type the answers on there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so for my face-to-face classes, that's how it will work. But I think that the consensus is that we would all prefer to turn it in person rather than submitting it on Blackboard where you have to type it, right? So you have the option of handwriting it or typing it. Online students are going to have, like, essay questions to answer, with a space to type and answer them about the documentary. So that's going to be it's not technically a midterm test. It is going to cover information from week 1 until week 8, but it's going to be heavy on Chapter 4, 5, and 6 topics. And then, of course, hammer home the sociological imagination and also some questions about the perspectives, too. Okay? So that's our timeline. That's our timeline for midterm. I think the syllabus says there's supposed to be another 50-point assignment in there someplace. Are you looking at the schedule?
Yeah.
Between now and then, if I have that, it will be something like matching or a multiple choice or something like that I'll give you that you can complete online at your leisure. Okay, between now and midterm. Questions?
So we need to prepare for the midterm October 6th.
Is when you're going to get it. It'll probably be due like the 8th or the 9th of October, because if I remember correctly, midterm grades, I'm required to post midterm grades on the 9th or the 10th, and I want that test to be one of the grades that's figured in. So y'all have like half your points earned. Got it? Okay. Alrighty, so that's the goal, the logistics, and let's get busy on the remainder of Chapter 4 and a little bit of Chapter 5 that's in our unit. There's the word I was looking for. Okay, so we are working on that big chart that we started like 2 weeks ago today, maybe, or a week ago today. I don't know how long it's been, but where we had social structure in the middle. We had an arm for social institutions. We had an arm for statuses and roles. We had an arm for social groups. And I think the social groups arm is the one that we haven't talked about yet. Am I right? Okay, so that's what we're going to start on today, and the pages that are included in your reading assignment for Chapter 5 are additional information about social groups that Chapter 4 didn't cover, okay? So the remainder of Chapter 4 and 5 we will talk about today. And yes, so the arm, I will make kind of the imagery of, this is one of the arms on that chart. This arm is covering social groups. Social groups, okay? I need to point out, and in chapter 5, you will read about words like category of people that we've already defined that. I think back in chapter, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3. We've already defined this in our notes someplace. We'll do it again really quick. And then there's also a term aggregate that you'll read about in chapter 5. And social groups has a specific definition that we need to differentiate among these 3 different sociological terms, okay? So all of these things refer to a collection of people, okay? A category is a collection of people with certain characteristics. An aggregate is a collection of people with a certain characteristic, and social groups are collections of people with certain characteristics. So it's the certain characteristics that you have to understand or make note of to keep these differentiated in your mind, okay? So a category of people, was anybody looking in your notes and found the definition of this while I was talking about it? Anybody remember what it is? Category of people is a macro level grouping of people. It's a macro level grouping. It's of people. There's my abbreviation for people, the PPL. People. It's a macro level grouping of people who share similar social characteristics in common. Now we have another, at least that's how the definition probably reads. Once you find it in your notes, that's how I probably described it first off. So it's a macro level grouping of people across a population who share social characteristics. A macro level grouping of people across an entire population. I'm emphasizing that entire population part because macro means that wide view, right? And all the people in a category, they might have a lot in common with each other because they share similar social characteristics, but they don't know each other. They're too spread out across the whole population. They just have common life experiences, common outlooks on life, other things in common because of the age they have, or the sex they have, or the ethnicity they have, or the social class that they have. Maybe those are the social characteristics. So there was a list that I just made. What did I say? I said sex or gender, race or ethnicity, age group, social class. Do those things sound familiar from a previous lecture? What is that a list of? It has to do with status. What kinds of statuses?
The air.
Ascribed status. Good. Yes, y'all were. I'm impressed that y'all didn't have to look back. Yeah, didn't have to look back through your notes very much. So that's good. Yeah, those are ascribed statuses. Okay. So I'm mentioning that now. We're trying to pull that out of you now because now we can maybe have a deeper understanding of what a category is. These social characteristics that we talk about, those social characteristics are essentially the statuses that they have in common, whether they are achieved or ascribed. The ones that I just rattled off in that list happen to be ascribed, but whether they are achieved or a master status or an ascribed status, those can be the social characteristics that they have in common. And so since norms on the macro scale govern the roles that go with those statuses, do you see how these shared social characteristics could create a common life experience for these people, even though they don't know each other? They're spread out from Washington State to Florida, Maine to California, and everywhere in between. Okay? With me? Alright, so a category is a macro-scale grouping of people that have similar life experiences because they share similar social characteristics. We could substitute the words statuses and roles in there, and that's why their life experiences are similar. An aggregate is a large grouping. Notice I am not going to say macro level. I'm going to say the word large. We have another differentiation here. It's a large grouping, not group, but grouping of people who are together just for a brief period of time. They're together simply for a common purpose that is temporary, and they will never necessarily be in the same place at the same time again.
Like our classroom?
Concert? Like a concert. I like the example of the concert example, not our classroom, because I'm going to use the classroom down here. Okay, so aggregate, large grouping of people who happen to be at the same place at the same time.
Like a food truck festival.
Ooh, yeah, did you go?
I was so mad I missed that.
No, you didn't miss anything because the lines were ridiculous.
The lines at
I
the
worked
food
at
truck
one year.
festival. Yeah. Okay, so a large group of people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. An aggregate. So yeah, a group of people at a concert. You happen to love whoever is coming, whatever the concert is. You happen to be all shopping on Black Friday in the mall or something. Do y'all do that? No, you could not pay me. I don't care what the deals are. Yeah, so anyway, that's an aggregate of people. There's not enough to keep them in common to say that everybody who shops on Black Friday has similar life experiences outside the mall. No. But every 25-year-old in the United States has some commonality of their life experience because they're 25 United States people. Right, 25-year-old United States people. So they would constitute a category, whereas people at a football game on Friday night are an aggregate. Okay? So those two concepts come from chapter 5. And we've talked about them before, at least the category of people thing we've talked about before. But I'm mentioning these, I'm reviewing these things with you now because it's important that you understand what the specific definition, what the specific idea is that differentiates social groups from these two things. Okay? One of the main things is that a social group is microscale.
Me and you.
It's me and you. Microscale meaning it is possible for me or you to have personal interaction with every other person in this classroom right now. It's not required that you have personal interaction with every other member of this classroom every single day, but it's possible, right? So this is a social group because, for multiple reasons, but first of all, because it's microscale enough for personal interaction to happen between that BX is the abbreviation that I put for between. It's for personal interaction to happen between members of a group. It's not required in all types of social groups, but it's possible for members of a social group to personally interact with each other. It is not possible for everybody at the mall on Black Friday to interact with each other. I don't want to talk to those people, right? I don't know about you. Yeah, I don't want to suck it out over who's going to get the TV, right? And the categories of people are so numerous that the number of people in each given category are so numerous and they're spread out so far. There's no way, right? So this one, interaction, being small enough to be able to interact with everybody, is one of the necessary components of a social group. Okay, so how many people does it take to be a social group, you think? 3?
More
I
than
would
one.
say 2.
You would say 2?
More than
I mean,
one.
Yeah, you have to have the interaction. You have to have personal interaction. So yes, so it's correct to think on the very small scale. But yeah, all you need is 2 or more, because 2 people can have personal interaction. You don't even have to be in the same room. You can FaceTime. You can whatever, right? But that personal interaction is indicative of the social group. Not yet. Thank you, though. Okay, so here's a question. So it is correct that a social group needs 2 people in it at minimum, and then goes on up to, I think there's 24 people enrolled in this class. Not everybody came today, but 24 people enrolled in the class. And so yes, we can go all the way up to 24 people. We can go all the way up to 60 people. We can go up to what you might think of as larger numbers, but as long as there are some other characteristics that we're going to cover really quick, and personal interaction is possible between each of the members of the group, then there are 2 of the characteristics that you need to be to be considered a social group. But let's look at this one really quick. Let's relate these 2 things and what we have so far in our definition of social group. This says that it has to be a large grouping. That's not always the case. It doesn't have to always be the kind of numbers that show up at a concert that you're interested in, or that you're a fan of that person. What if, for instance, you're on the elevator in this building going up to the 4th floor, and 2 or 3 other people have that same purpose in common? And you say hi to each other while you're on the elevator. What do you think? It doesn't constitute a social group. So we need more. That would be a very small aggregate of people. I mean, aggregates tend to be larger, but even just a couple of you on an elevator going from floor 1 to floor 4, you have a purpose in common, and you might say hi to each other, but there's no reason you would ever interact with each other ever again after that. Yes, sir?
It might be a stretch, but couldn't you consider them, because we're all students on an elevator?
We're going to talk about the student status in just a second and how that overlaps with this concept of social group.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, so a social group, the members of a social group have bonds that tie them together, some sort of bonds. Sometimes the bonds are temporary, like your question about the students. So yes, right now in this social group that we have, you have a bond with each member of this group, at least for the duration of this semester, when you see each other in the hallway, or when whatever, you need notes, or you need to ask somebody for, what happened in sociology class today, that kind of stuff. You will recognize each other and say, there's my bond that can bring about a pointed kind of conversation and interaction that I need because my social group has a purpose or it has a goal, which is the next thing here. So it's bonds that tie members together, and there's a goal. There are specific goals for why you are tied together. Why members are tied together. So it's personal interaction is possible with everybody. It doesn't mean that you do it. But you have to have personal interaction as possible with every single member in order for it to be a social group. You have to have 2 or more people for it to be a social group. You have to have some kind of bond that ties people together, whether it's temporary, like your college grouping, your college social groups that you're in, or whether it's permanent, like your family affiliations, right? You have to have some sort of bond that ties members together. Tie members. I don't know, does the grammar look remotely right on that? fix the grammar, whatever I got wrong. Anyway, and then also, every time there is a social group, one of the characteristics of it is that you have a goal for why you're together to begin with. Okay? Since these social groups we're talking about, since this arm thing that I kind of redrew up here, what is that arm linking the concept of social groups to? What are the things it's linked to?
Is it not norms?
Well, remember the chart that we were working on at the very beginning of chapter 4, the social structure or society?
Beside it, or like the
Yeah, well, there's 2 of them, right? Well, yeah, I circled the intersection of all of them because they're all connected, and so I'm asking you to tell me what is it connected to? Huh? A society is at the top, and this is right at the bottom. Statuses and roles was in the middle, and what's on the other side of social institutions? All three of those things combined make up social structure, make up society. Okay? So these things we call social groups, these things are linked directly to statuses. And so when you were asking me a question about being a student a minute ago, that was a status question. But does it have to do with social groups also?
Yes.
Yes, this is a social group. It's a specific type of social group. We have two types of social groups. One of them is called a primary group, and the other one is called a secondary group. So there's two different types of social groups. And the way that you differentiate between the two different types of social groups is from this list over here. You look at the differing ways that these two social groups look at these issues. What's the word primary mean? Main or first. And secondary means comes after, right? Yeah, so primary and secondary, these words come from, we name social groups this based on the significance that they have to our socialization process. Socialization is that lifelong learning process that we go through in our from birth to death, where we have formal learning like you and I are doing in this classroom, but you also have informal learning like you do with your friends and neighbors and family members, right? Okay, so primary groups tend to be the friends and the neighbors and the family members. So they tend to be smaller, they tend to be longer lasting interaction, and they tend to have emotional bonds that bring them or that bind them together. Primary groups do. Smaller, longer lasting groups, and they tend to have emotional bonds that bring them together. So, a group of siblings. Okay, smaller numbers of siblings, usually 2, 3 kids, maybe 4 kids in a family on average. That's a smaller group. And the bonds that bring them together are that family relationship they have, whether they realize it or not. My niece stormed down the hallway the other day and slammed the door and said, "I hate you," to one of her siblings. But is hate an emotion? It's a strong one, right? So it's a strong emotional bond that you have with members of a family or with your best friends, people that you associate with on a long-term basis. Very frequently you associate them. It could be you can develop primary groups from a group of coworkers, but no, if there's a group of wait staff in a Chili's who happen to be there, for the night shift regularly together, friendliness is a component of the personal interaction that they have, but friendliness is a component of professionalism with those people, right? So sure, you can meet your best friend, you can meet your future husband, you can meet whoever might be a member of your primary group because you work on the wait staff at Chili's. Yeah. But no, typically a group of coworkers, a larger group of coworkers, unless it's like a really long-term, situation, would be in secondary groups. Sometimes you'd put coworkers in primary groups. Yeah. But secondary groups tend to be, they don't have to be, but they tend to be larger. They tend to be temporary. And they tend to have something that we call instrumental bonds. Here's a key term from chapter 4 or 5. I can't remember what chapter it comes from. It's in your reading assignment someplace. They tend to have what we call instrumental bonds. It's more of goal-oriented communication, business-like communication. What'd you say? In school, yes. In our classroom, when we have interaction, it is important for it to be appropriate interaction for the classroom environment. There's like a little bit more, you can't just let your guard down completely like maybe you can with your primary group and just let your cuss or whatever, whatever you might do. There is a professional kind of interaction. So for instance, I like, in my professional kind of interaction, I like friendliness to be part of the professional communication pattern. But friendliness does not need to be confused with friendship, right? Friendliness is simply a way to build a nice professional rapport with people. So, not so. However, you would probably, I'm guessing, that all of you would draw the line somewhere between my friendliness with you in a professional manner and friendliness that people might have with each other in a primary group. For instance, you can either love this or hate this, and maybe we were talking about this in this class. I don't remember if it was this class or one of my other classes. We were talking about this last week. Primary groups of females in particular, good groups of females that have strong emotional bonds with each other, that use the B word as a term of endearment. Was that this class that we were talking about?
I was like, I don't like it.
Wait,
Okay.
what?
Okay, so for instance, I have seen, like in Subway, the cafeteria over here at school or at the South Campus, I have seen groups of girls, young women, sitting around a table, and I interpret their social interaction. I interpret the reality of their social interaction as though they are very close friends because they use the B word instead of each other's name as like a term of endearment.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But
So some people say, well, that's okay. Some people say that's not okay. That's not my point for bringing it up in this conversation. My point is the types of communication. You have to have personal interaction to be a social group. And friendliness is a component of the norms of our society for a lot of different types of personal interaction. Emotional bonds might mean that some groups of female friends use the B word as a nickname for each other or a friendly term of endearment. But the friendliness with professionalism, if when Amy answers a question in class and I'm proud of her, I cannot say to her, even if I was inclined, way to go, B.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of funny though.
But it would not. It might be funny to like 3 of you, but 3 of you would be completely appalled, and that's, you know that there's a line, right? You know that there's a line. So primary groups and secondary groups are connected to statuses and roles because teacher, student, we can't, by the norms associated with teacher, student, we can't talk to each other and communicate to each other as freely and openly as siblings can, best friends can, whatever, because there are different norms that come from society on the macro scale that govern this micro scale stuff. Right? Okay. So all of this is connected, and that's why I drew this pitiful little arm thing on the top of this to remind you that this is one of the 3 components of social structure that make up society on the macro scale, okay? And they're all connected to each other because social institutions, like family or education system, create, among others, but those are 2 we used as examples, like family or education system are social institutions that create what statuses and roles does that create? Family and education system. You can use achieved and described, but specifically give me some names of some statuses and roles that goes with education system or family. Like mom.
Oh, okay.
Right? I'm sorry, I asked the question poorly. But student, right? There's a status that goes with education system. Teacher, there's a status that goes with education system. But those statuses don't just exist outside the social structure. The social structure and social institutions create the norms that we have to follow, and then the way we live out those roles comes from the social groups that we're a part of. Primary groups and secondary groups. these things kind of govern the way we interpret reality. And, while some of you might think it's funny if I use the B word with one or two girls in this class and not anybody else, would you be able to interpret, oh, well, she must have known them outside this class beforehand?
Yes.
You would, right? So you're interpreting reality from looking at the communication pattern, from observing body language, observing verbal and nonverbal communication patterns. You interpret reality about people's relationships. And we have terms now about primary and secondary groups that we're a part of that are directly linked to the statuses and roles that are on the micro and the macro scale, that are directly linked to the social institutions that are on the macro scale, right? What do you think? See the connections to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is one of three of what? Social.
This is one of three what, y'all? This is one of the three arms on that chart that we are reproducing that was social structure and society at the top. And then social institutions we started, I think, a week ago today was when we discussed that. On Wednesday, we discussed the middle arm, statuses and roles. And now today, this one. Okay? Oh, yeah, you were absent one of those days. I'm not sure when. Okay. The video's online, though, so.
Yeah, I know I have to stop.
Yes. And the expected norm for the secondary group that you're in is that you watch those videos.
Yeah.
Okay. And my body language there, right? I'm insisting. Okay. All right, questions. Seems like you had a question, you never said it. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Oh, so now can you take like a close-up picture, like stand in the middle and take a close-up picture? So really no questions or anything? What would a church group be? A congregation. Which type of social group? Primary or secondary?
It'd be secondary.
Can be both.
Not necessarily.
We go to church every day.
It could be both.
If like we can make with all the ifs, we can make it a primary or a secondary. But what do you think? Just in general, we don't know anything about it. I'm just saying it's a church group.
Secondary. Secondary.
Why?
Because you're only with those people on Sundays.
You have a purpose, and you really have a purpose-driven bond. You have a purpose-driven reason for being there. It might be a personal kind. It might be like an emotional kind of goal that you're working on. But yes, in general, in sociology, we say that a church group is a secondary group. Do what?
They were saying that it wasn't primary, but I think it's different because I'm from a small town and the churches were a lot more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I am from a teeny tiny little church. As a matter of fact, so many of us were out of town yesterday. I think there were 17 people in the congregation. But still, we are a secondary group because the reason we're there is it's the goal that we're there for is an instrumental bond. Like we're there to, it sounds very personal and inner or internal, I guess the word is. But, salvation, that's a personal and interior kind of struggle that you share with these people, but that's the only reason I know those people. That's the only reason I know those people. That's the only reason they know me. And even though you can say that a lot of times your church group is something that might be larger, but doesn't necessarily have to be. But sometimes it's very long lasting. For instance, I was born into the church that I still go to today. And I'm young, but I'm very old too. So anyway, it's been a long time, in other words, that I've been a member of that church. But that church group is one of my secondary groups. Y'all are one of my secondary groups. Okay? Did you get that picture? Yes, thank you.
Now, what category would a club at school be, or like a club at college? Secondary? Would it really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You could, if you're in a club and you meet a best friend, you meet someone to date, you meet somebody that you future marry or something, you might, secondary groups are usually, except for the primary groups that we're born into, like our family or our group of siblings or something, most primary groups for the rest of our lives we get from our secondary group membership. So if you are a fortunate person who started out in kindergarten and you met your best friend in kindergarten and you still go to school together today, all your other classmates are your secondary group, but you and your best friend constitute a primary group. Where did you meet that best friend? Kindergarten, which was a secondary
So
group.
primary groups can exist within secondary groups.
Absolutely. And you usually get primary groups from secondary groups. You go to Alcoholics Anonymous for a particular business-like goal, and you get a sponsor, and you form a relationship and a bond that is very personal, that you call each other at 2 a.m. and that kind of thing. That's a primary group you got in a secondary group. Make sense? Maybe you meet your future spouse at church. Church, secondary group, spouse, primary group. Make sense? Okay. So you will see in, I don't know, when am I going to sign that? There's a music video that I want y'all to watch for one of the assignments that we're going to do soon. And you'll see like primary and secondary group memberships kind of in the imagery of that music video. So you'll need that vocabulary for that purpose. Okay, what time is it?
2:08.
Okay, good. We have plenty of time then for me to talk about this next, and the next very important topic. It's a micro-scale topic that we look at, in social groups, that we look at as the interpretation of reality in society. It's called the presentation of the self. The presentation of the self in everyday life. Presentation of the self in everyday life. This is a micro-scale topic, and it's about how we interpret reality and how we behave as individuals. That is, those behaviors are defined by the social groups that we're in. They're defined by the statuses that we occupy and the roles that go with those statuses. And those statuses and roles, of course, come from social institutions that exist on the macro scale. Got it? Okay. So, one of the questions on the 25-point activity that's on Blackboard right now, one of the questions has to do with presentation of the self in everyday life. Have y'all looked at those tattoo questions yet? Okay, so there's a picture on there, and you're supposed to evaluate it with a couple things. This is one of the things you're supposed to talk about. Okay, so as you're reading in chapter 4, toward the end of chapter 4, it's after, it's like page 111 or 112 in chapter 4, you're going to read about something called impression management. Impression management. These are the behaviors that we go through to try to get other people to view us in a certain way. Favorable way, maybe, but maybe we don't want certain groups of people to find us favorable, right? So it's about our idea about how we want others to evaluate us, okay?
So pretty much if you went on a job interview and you dressed
Good.
a certain way.
Good example, job interview. Yep, let me finish writing this up and then we'll use that as an example, yes. Okay, so efforts we go through to try and get others to evaluate us in a way we want. I'm trying to find a more concise way to say this. Because maybe I want you to have a favorable opinion of me, but if you are a social group that I really don't want to be associated with,
So like
how do I put that?
an opinion that you have.
Yes, it's like, okay, so if I do,
pro-choice friend or something.
maybe, yeah. So the job interview thing is a good example. So in a job interview, you want to not just dress the part, which I think is what is the first part of your example, but you also want to behave in a way, answer questions in a way, maybe have posture that's different, that you pay more attention to than just in everyday life. So of course in a job interview, you haven't applied for that job because you don't want to get it. You didn't agree to go to the interview because you don't want that job. So you want, of course, to bring about, they like you, they think you're the right candidate for the job, they're going to offer it to you. But in some cases, there might be social groups that you do not want to be affiliated with, that you do not want to, to like you because you disagree with them politically or morally or any of the examples that you had. So it is, so impression management are the efforts that we go through to bring about whatever outcome we want from the situation, favorable or not favorable.
So that's how we set the stage.
Yes. And I'm glad you used the word stage. We're actually going to talk about that metaphor of theatrics, the theatrics of daily life, as being a way to interpret reality. Yep. Just to see us the way we want. Okay, so this is a poorly worded definition that I put on the board just now. Your textbook author gives you a more eloquent sentence or two to explain this. But it's not just about people finding you in a favorable light and judging you favorably. Maybe that's not the outcome I want from you. I don't want you, or I don't want strangers to interpret me as this person when I'm not.
It just made me think, how they judge you with the company you keep, that saying.
Oh yeah, guilty by association, or people judge you by the company you keep. Okay, yes. So we know that these sayings, are in our culture, and so impression management has a lot to do with that. Yeah. Okay. So impression management is about presentation of the self in everyday life. What does self mean? Your inner person? Just inner person?
You see yourself as a person. Everything that affects
Your
who you
being.
are.
Your being, everything that affects who you are, things like your posture, things like how you dress, things like how you interact with people, right? So the sum total, the self, your self-concept, is the sum total of all your ideas that you have that you evaluate yourself as or that you see yourself as. So if you made a list of, this is what my statuses are, and this is how I behave within these statuses, that would be part of your self-concept, right? But it's more than just your inner ideas about yourself, it's your outer ideas also, because how much of our self-concept do we get from the feedback we get from others? A good bit. I don't have a better answer than just a good bit. I don't have, 80% comes from. No, I'm not going to give you a statistic like that. But a good bit of the way that we think others imagine us or perceive us, a good bit comes from, of our self-concept comes from that. Whether we are correct about their assessment of us or incorrect about their assessment of us. So impression management, we go through efforts to try to bring about favorable attitudes that others have about us. Is the favorable attitude that I want you to like me, or is the favorable attitude that I do not want you to confuse me as one of you? Right? Whichever the favorable outcome is, that's impression management. There is a famous microscale sociologist. His name is Irving Goffman. Very famous. I love his work personally, but Irving Goffman is a very famous symbolic interactionist. That's a micro-level sociologist who looks at interaction and the use of symbols to communicate and to create reality. And so he has a way of looking at and interpreting social life that he calls the dramaturgical analysis. Yes, it's an ugly word, isn't it? The dramaturgical analysis of daily life. Dramaturgy is a word that simply means theatrical, a stage production, a movie, something like that. Something that has actors, something that has a script. That's dramaturgy. So a dramaturgical analysis of everyday life, Irving Goffman said you can best interpret reality by analyzing things that are happening around you in terms of actors on a stage with a script. Okay? So dramaturgy, actors. The actors can be the self, but the actors can be others that we're around, right? The actors can also be members of, come full circles, they can be members of an audience. So the actors are people. It can be yourself. It is yourself. You are an actor, according to the way Irving Goffman analyzes our situation right now. Are you playing a part right now that is different than the part you will play when you're walking between classes, that's different than the part you will play when you're going through the drive-thru later? Yes. Is it because you have split personality disorder? No.
Maybe.
It's because, no, I hope not, you're in the wrong class. But anyway, no, it's because the different social scenes that we have, the different settings of daily life, do they have different scripts?
Mm-hmm.
They have different scripts. The script comes from the norms associated with the situation. Mm-hmm. You used the word stage a minute ago, I think. Yeah, stage. That's what we're talking about here. On a stage, for any of you who have ever been involved in a dramatic production, there's different settings, there's different scenes. You pull the curtain, you change the background, right? And you set the stage in a different way. And speaking of the curtain and doing stuff behind a curtain, do we have some behavior in our daily life that is not supposed to be done in front of an audience?
Yes.
Yes. So Irving Goffman goes further and he talks about the difference between, can y'all see this? You can't see this.
It's okay.
He talks about the difference between backstage behavior versus front stage behavior. Yeah, green room. No, he did not say green room behavior. He said backstage behavior and front stage behavior. So y'all were very quick to say, oh yes, that our daily social script has some behaviors that the audience is not supposed to see and some behaviors that it's okay for the audience to see. So give me some examples.
Getting naked.
Yes, in our society, we have a norm about nakedness, right? And believe me, we have to learn this norm. In our socialization process, how many of y'all raise little ones, it takes a long time for them to understand what naked means, right? And naked has a particular place and time, and it ain't class, right? Right? I mean, even, yeah, or walking in the park or on the playground or something, right? And so, yes, we definitely have to learn the norms about what degrees of nakedness are or are not appropriate in different settings. You're not at the beach, you're at sociology class, so you have to wear appropriate costumes for this particular setting. Well, costumes are part of the scene, right? Part of the stage. That's part of what you do in the background, right? So yes, so anything having to do with the body maintenance, can I say that? Anything that has to do, how do I spell maintenance? Maintenance. Is that how you spell it? Okay. So anything that has to do with body maintenance is supposed to be in the backstage. I don't want to see you flossing your teeth in sociology class either. Right? I don't want you to bring your scope in and gurgle and spit it in the spit cup in sociology class, right? Like this is not, these are behaviors that are supposed to be behind the scene, just like actors have to prepare for a scene by going into wardrobe, going into makeup, and changing what's behind them on the stage. Okay, so there are some things that are backstage behaviors you're not supposed to see in public, or the audience is not supposed to see it. Do actors, meaning you, do you know what those behaviors are? Do we know without thinking what those behaviors are? Yes. Now we do, but we had to learn them in our socialization process. Okay? So for instance, before class, I was talking about a little girl at church yesterday who sneezed and she had like spaghetti stuff that comes out, and she started going like this to eat it.
Yeah.
And that's it. Her mother didn't say, in the middle of church, but her mother was like, rushing to fix that because that's not part of, I mean, the little girl was little. Nobody's holding it against the mother. You know, she was like 2. Little girls, that's another thing that little kids have to learn, right? We have a very complicated ritual about how to appropriately clean our noses in public and in private, right? This will work, you're not supposed to use it. This will work, you're not supposed to use it. That works, you're not supposed to eat it. We have a really complicated ritual, right? So that's part of the scene. It's part of the script. It's part of, daily life. Sometimes backstage behavior happens in the front stage. We will talk about that in just a second, but we need to get some examples of front stage behavior. Such as? Do what? It is the analogy, yes, to keep with that analogy, it's the stuff that the audience is supposed to see. Maybe not necessarily must see, but it's okay for the audience to see. There's no embarrassment, there's no awkwardness, there's no problem with it at all. So yes, it's the part of the script that is okay for an audience to see. And how many of y'all have read a play like in English class or something? Like it has instructions in there, right? Off scene, you hear somebody shout this. Or she's saying these lines while she's washing dishes, right? I mean, it's got stage instructions on there. And Irving Goffman talks about how you can interpret everyday life and interpret reality if you use that metaphor. Yes, so the front stage stuff is, so backstage, audience is not supposed to see it. Front stage behavior, it's okay for the audience to see it. Some things they have to see. Other things, it's not so much you have to, but it's okay. There's not going to be any embarrassment. There's not going to be any, shame associated with certain behaviors if the audience sees it or not. True story, she doesn't work here anymore, but one of the ladies who used to work in administration here went to the restroom, backstage behavior, right? Went to the restroom. And when she came out of the restroom, her skirt was like tucked into her underwear. Yeah. So like she didn't feel it, and it was like she was walking around showing her bleep, literally, not just figuratively. But that, and so there was a major situation where the audience was not supposed to see that. That was not even part of the script. Like, that's not the costume, right? Not for that particular setting. And so that happens sometimes. And so Irving Goffman also talks about a concept called face-saving behavior. What does it mean to save face?
Fake it.
Does it mean to fake it?
So, like,
I think it just means to
correct any behavior.
I like starting this with like a correction. So what that person did, that person who used to work here, she had to correct. So this was an embarrassing situation, right? Embarrassment because audience members, everybody in this class, for instance, saw something that wasn't part of the script. It wasn't even really backstage behavior because it was just like an accident, a side effect of doing something hastily or in the backstage. And so face-saving behavior is this concept where, you're trying to correct or, let's say, rehabilitate your image with the audience by fixing, what was wrong. I am famous for, it happens at the South Campus all the time, but when you are walking in public as an aggregate, if you are an aggregate, you're just walking along in the mall, you're just walking in between classes, are you supposed to call attention to yourself as an individual, or are you supposed to kind of just pass anonymously? Yeah, it's a concept, it's an interesting concept, too, that Irving Goffman talks about called civil inattention. When you're in public, you're kind of not supposed to stand out like, wow, it's me, right? You're not the star of the show, you're in the chorus of the show when you're in public. Well, sometimes with me, I don't know what it is over at the South Campus, the floor, I sometimes will trip over a flat floor. Don't know why. Don't know why, but you're supposed to just walk past each other, and I don't even notice who I'm walking past, right? But whenever I'm not trip like this. My loud feet to make everybody stop and look, right? I mean, it's not in the script. You're not supposed to trip over your own feet. So I have had to develop a face-saving behavior that just has become part of my script now, since it seems to happen to this klutz all the time. And I just kind of laugh at myself. I'm like, oh, ha ha, I tripped over something that's not there, and kind of blow it off with self-deprecating humor, for instance.
Like, 'cause you're embarrassed.
Right, because embarrassment happens when things that the audience isn't supposed to see, they see it anyway. And so, so face-saving behavior is like you're trying to rehab your image with the people who saw something that they shouldn't see. So a lot of this impression management and presentation of the self in everyday life, this dramaturgical analysis and interpretation of daily life, in that tattoo activity that's in Blackboard right now, you can use these words, you can use these descriptors to answer part of that first question. When it asks you about that individual with the tattoo on his neck, I guess it's a man, I don't even remember if it's a man or a girl. You can't see the picture? Can y'all see the picture in the thing on Blackboard? Okay. There is a picture that you're supposed to look at, so if you can't, let me know, and I'll send it to you a different way if you can't access it through Blackboard. But yeah, the individual has a tattoo, something about partying hard or something, on his or her neck. And, so this is an image, right? This is a status symbol. You've got a ton of vocabulary words from chapter 4 and 5. You've got things like status symbol. You've got things like statuses and roles to begin with, the social groups that you're in. As a matter of fact, I think what's written on the...
I did see that one.
Yeah, what's written on the neck in a tattoo is something about, like, my group. We will always party hard. So it's like, okay, maybe this is like something my primary group does or something. And I'm going to tattoo it on my neck. So, okay, so how does that fit in with the rest of the social structure? Is that individual going to be, or let me rephrase that, does that individual follow the social script for like the rest of life, right? And I have to wonder, when they get old and their neck gets all wrinkly, like, what words are going to show? I'm not sure. Yeah. But anyway, so look at that picture, look at the questions, but use the vocabulary word that you have. It's part of the critical reasoning that you're working on in sociology class. Part of the reason why this is on your degree plan is because you're supposed to be a better thinker. Of course, I would love it if all of you major in sociology, but that's not the purpose that you are here. You're here to just be a better thinker in any and all of the degree programs that you're going into. Whether you're going to be a chef, or you're going to be a nurse, or you're going to be a philosopher, or anything in between. My grandson is getting a degree in fisheries management at the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. He has to take sociology. Okay? So sociology is a course that just helps you with critical reasoning, okay, and just better understanding of daily life in general, okay? So questions. Y'all gonna see your lives like this from now on? I think it'll be good. Yes, if you will take pictures, maybe like 2, I don't know, just something close up, straight on, that would be great to give to online students. And goodbye, online students, if I can turn this off.